Hello everyone, welcome to the In the Frame podcast. I'm Luke. Joining me today is Pip Piper, and we have the wonderful guest, Jackie, producer of Escape from Pretoria. How are you doing, Jackie?
Yeah, all good. Thanks, Luke. Yep, thanks for having me. Nice to see you and Pip.
Nice to see you guys too. Remember to like and subscribe to the OSBD channel. Go to osbd.com/intheframe to learn more.
OSBD.org, Luke.
OSBD.org. I'll get it right. It's on screen now.
One day.
Not a double act.
I know.
Me and Pip, the ultimate double act. And so please subscribe and let's get to it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jackie, for joining us today. It's brilliant to have you. I know you're a super busy person, especially with Escape from Pretoria. Coming out this year with Daniel Radcliffe, a big film. So no doubt we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. But one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today, knowing that you're a producer and been doing that for a long time across a whole variety of different things, is how do you go about deciding on the projects that you're going to pick up on, knowing how much things take time, effort, money, how do you go about sort of choosing things, and how has that perhaps changed from when you first started out, thinking that the majority of our audience are people who are perhaps emerging filmmakers, to how it is today?
I think, interestingly, there is no one way that these projects come to you. So we've got probably a whole bunch of projects on our slate, which I think have all come in different ways. And because Mark, my producing partner, and I, we refer to ourselves as creative producers. So it is mostly stuff that we find. Although a lot of people do try and send us scripts or approach us about material, it is mostly stuff that we found ourselves. So if we take Escape as an example, that was actually Mark being out in South Africa, trying to set up a different film altogether. So he was doing research into a project that was about one thing, and during that trip someone said to him, "Oh, you should meet this guy Tim Jenkin, who was an anti-apartheid activist and escaped from Pretoria prison." And so so Mark and Tim actually met and had a meal together, and Tim told him his story, and Mark just thought, wow, that's a film we should tell. Now actually that was quite scary. That was about 16 or 17 years ago that they actually met.
Wow.
For the first time. So lest you think you just come away and go, yep, that's great, we'll do that. That's not always how it works. And to be honest, we had the rights to the story for a while, and then we got busy doing other projects and we let them lapse, and then it came back again. So there's a time scale on some of these things. So that was one project. Another feature that we did was actually a script that somebody sent us. And whilst we didn't like the script particularly, we liked the central premise of the story, which was about kids walking across Africa to the Soccer World Cup in 2010. And you kind of felt, yeah, there was some resonance there. So actually we took the central premise and then got a new writer in to write the story. And that one was much quicker. That was 18 months from reading that first script. Or maybe slightly longer than that, but probably 2 years. So we read the script, liked it, got someone else to write it. And from that point, it was 18 months till it hit the screens.
Wow.
So that was super quick. So these things vary.
I mean, just to unpick that a little bit, there's a couple of things I'd like to pick up on, just so people understand. One is, what's a slate? Some people might not know what that is. Secondly, when you talked about with Escape to Pretoria, after that you had the rights for a while. What does that look like? So, I mean, I'm presuming you're talking about that optioning and stuff, but be just interesting just to unravel that. And then secondly, just to pick up, I'm presuming it's Africa United, isn't it, you're talking about, which is an absolutely fantastic film. Why was that so quick? My clue would be, was it because it was the World Cup was coming up, so there's a sense in which that it kind of had to be done in a certain time frame if it was going to happen at all. But it'd be great just to pick up on those points, if that's okay.
Okay, there's quite a lot of question in there, so you might have to remind me what some of the questions.
So Slate.
Slate.
Yeah.
So slate, first of all, is just how we refer to the number of projects that we're looking at. So we refer to it as a slate of projects. I don't know why it's called a slate of projects. I guess it's just like laying it out on the table in front of you. And we probably have about 10 projects that we're actively working on at the moment, trying in development, that we're trying to move forward into production. And they would all be at different stages. So that was number one. That's the slate. What was number two?
The whole thing around about, you said that you had the rights to Escape to Pretoria for a while.
Yeah. So it's just to correct you, it's Escape from Pretoria. I don't think they were trying to get there. I think they were trying to get away from
that wouldn't be good at all.
Escape to
Escape
Pretoria
from
Pretoria will be the follow-up, when they go back. No, they don't. Yeah. So maybe to forget what the question was again.
The rights.
The rights. Yeah. So Tim Jenkin, who the story is set around, wrote a book called Inside Out, Escape from Pretoria. And so we took an option over that book, which we then had for quite a number of years. But options, you tend to have you'll have an 18-month period with an option to renew, which becomes almost an automatic thing. So it might be another year and then a third option, and then so another year. So each year you're paying a fairly, depending on the property, you're paying a smallish amount of money to option that book. And then when you actually get to shooting, if that's what happens, then you actually buy the rights. So you take up the option on it, and at that point, then the sums of money obviously become that much bigger.
Yeah.
But we had an option on the book, which we then allowed to lapse because we were doing other things, and then because we were mentoring a young writer director who said, "That's the one I want to do." We had to go back and get the rights back and option the book again. And Tim has been very gracious with us. I think he must have thought at times across the years, this is never going to happen. And various people tried to make it happen, but eventually he was in London with us at the premiere, so he knew it did happen. But those things can take a while, but that's what an option is. And then was there another part to your question?
Yeah, so the third one was just because obviously you talked about how, it was from when that first kind of dinner happened in South Africa, it was nearly 17 years for the film to come out. So obviously that's a long period of time. But then with Africa United, that was much quicker. And it was about the fact that sometimes, again, projects that you're trying to get to market can have different lifespans because things have an influence upon them. So in that, I imagine it was the World Cup.
It was the World Cup. As is often the way, it's a timing thing. It's about what the kind of zeitgeist is at the moment. And we were very fortunate that Pathé, who had made Slumdog Millionaire, were looking for another sort of similar-ish property, I guess. And we just happened to come along with a property that worked, that felt, it was like a fun movie, that was kids, that was Africa, it was the World Cup, so lots of things to hang it on. And Pathé came on board very quickly, really. They read, I think, a first draft of the script, which was still quite a long way from being ready, but they came on board, and because they came on board, they were then able to encourage other big financiers to come on board. So that became then a fairly straightforward process, because Pathé are a sort of what they call one of the mini majors. So it's like going to a movie studio where they've got everything, the finance, they've got the marketing. So it becomes a sort of one-stop shop. So it's a much easier process, whereas Escape from Pretoria was much more a package of getting finance from lots of different places, organisations, people, pre-sales, all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so that then becomes a much harder thing to put together and takes much longer.
So Jackie, you've mentioned first, Escape from Pretoria is based on a real life story that you guys learned about 16 years ago. Here at OSBD, we have a rich history of making documentaries, finding stories, telling stories around different areas of niche excitement like biking and vinyl. I was curious, what made a story like Escape from Pretoria seem film worthy for you to kind of put to screen, and what's the difference between a story going to screen and a story not going to screen?
Good question. So I think one of the things that Mark and I both do, we both have a bit of a documentary background. So I think that's what has always drawn us to the true stories. And although Africa United wasn't a true story, it sort of felt like it could be a true story. And in fact, the writer and director did go, they did a sort of road trip across Africa and chatted to kids and asked them lots of questions, what would you do in this situation? So it sort of felt like it was engaged in a certain reality. And I think for both Mark and I, it is that engagement with a story that feels like it's real. We're developing another story at the moment, which is around a female sumo wrestling team, which isn't based on fact, but again feels like it could be, because there are female sumo wrestlers, and again it's not just about sumo wrestling, it's about body image and how we define ourselves in relation to all of that. And I think it's coming across stories that you feel has the power to be entertaining, but also to make people think. And I think with Africa United, we covered off a number of issues. So it was about, we had children in HIV, we had a girl who really wanted to go to school but couldn't afford it. We had a girl who was a former sex worker, a former child soldier, but also a middle-class African kid that showed, not everyone in Africa is poor and downtrodden. So we were trying to show that there's all of these issues, what it's like to be a kid in Africa. Or as the Daily Mail famously called it, filmmaking by a social work committee. It's funny how you can have 100 reviews, 98 of which were brilliant and 2 which were poor. And which are the 2 that I can quote you? Always the way, isn't it? What's that about?
Yeah.
And with Escape from Pretoria, it wasn't just about 2 or 3 guys getting out of prison. It was the reason for them being in prison, which was they were imprisoned for their anti-apartheid activities. And you realise that when we met the guys for real, and the first time I met them, we were having lunch together, and I just thought, this is extraordinary. I'm in the room with 2 guys who absolutely stood up to be counted and went to prison for what they believed to be right. And I think if you can send an audience away thinking, what would we have done in those circumstances? So I think for us, it's those hooks, those things that you think that it's more than just a film. It's about making people think about issues and maybe questioning where we're at as well. And all of those things about, is it cinematic, and is it going to be entertaining? Our audience is going to enjoy it. And I think with Escape, Mark Kermode said he was sat on the edge of his seat physically. So if you can achieve that, not too bad.
That's fantastic.
Amazing.
There's a couple of things. I'm not going to bombard you again like I did before, but there's a couple of things, I guess. One is, so often I get into conversations with people about, and it's interesting you say at the moment you've got 10 projects. Sometimes I get into conversations with people that seem very fixated on what you could perhaps term a passion project. They're just completely, utterly focused on one thing. And I guess the great thing about a slate is that you're developing lots. You're not quite sure which will go. What is it that you're, obviously it's really important for you guys that you're telling a story, something that feels truthful, whether it's truthful or whether it feels like it's truthful in a number of different ways. And I know you don't have a magic, sort of things you can't say, oh, we definitely know this one's going to work and it's going to be successful. But there's often that real knife edge, isn't there, between stories that feel like they could be really great and, oh, there's something really brilliant here, and things that just don't quite work for the market, in terms of the people then coming and saying, well, yeah, that we will put money into this, we will put resources and all the various things that need to go around a film so it gets out there and it finds an audience. How do you kind of tread that delicate balance on things? And are there projects sometimes where you just go, it's just not going to work, even though we think it's great?
Yeah, and to be honest, we've just done that with a project. We met a writer a number of years ago who we absolutely love. He's a lovely chap and he writes great stuff. And he'd written a project that we loved and we tried to get it going and we just couldn't. And a little while ago, we had to say to him, really sorry, but much as we love it, we just don't think it's going to work. We just don't think that we're ever going to find someone who will finance it. And it was a shame because I still love it. I still think it's a really great project, but for whatever reason, and you sort of end up with a kind of bit of a gut sense about it, and we pushed a number of doors and just nobody was biting, and you just think, yeah, no, it's not going to work. Now, funnily enough, that same writer at the end of that conversation said to us, well, I have got another project that I've been toying with for a little while, and I wondered if you might be interested in it. And again, it's a true story. And we went away and read all the material that he'd mentioned to us and said, oh yeah, no, that's good. So that's another one added to our slate. So it is a really fine line. And sometimes as well, Escape, when it first started, there was somebody else who was involved with it, and he was a very political animal, and he wanted it to be driven by the politics, whereas Mark had always said, no, it's got to be driven by the escape and the mechanics of the escape, because it's an extraordinarily ingenious way that they did it. And there had been a time where I think the kind of the much more political version had almost got to screen but didn't, and it just never felt quite right. And then suddenly escape movies were coming back into the fore, and oh, we've got an escape movie. So I mean, I sometimes watch films that are made now and think, why, how? And there's just no science around it, and at the end of the day, everybody, nobody knows anything about what's going to be successful and what works and what doesn't work. And sometimes it is just literally, as I said before, it's the zeitgeist. It's what's flavour of the month at that particular time.
So on that then, because I, as you know, I teach on a couple of master's programs, one of which is around feature film development. Students are constantly being bombarded about, obviously story is really important, and I think that's great. We're always going back to that, but to help a film potentially get to market and be successful, cast is very important. And obviously for Escape, you got Daniel Radcliffe. So how important was it to have somebody of that stature in the film? Did he come in when it was already on a great trajectory to being made, or was that kind of one of the components that really helped it? So how important is cast when people are developing their projects?
I mean, it depends at the level at which you're working, but yeah, cast. Everyone always, when you go to a financier, their first question is, who's in it? And that becomes a kind of chicken and egg thing, because often then if you want a big name like a Daniel, you're going to ask, and the agent's going to say, well, who's financing it? And you just get, what? I can't. What? Yeah. One of you please say yes to something. And with Daniel, he was amazing, and he came in when we weren't financed, and obviously became the key component, what's called an essential element for many of the financiers. So they would only finance us as long as Dan was in the movie. And he stuck with us for, it was about 2 years from us announcing he was in until we were financed. And he worked a lot with the writer director on the script, and was very engaged with the project generally. So he was great, and that obviously made a huge difference. And it also makes a difference attracting other cast as to who wants to be in it, who wants to work with. And sometimes that becomes a bit of a jigsaw, because you'll get somebody sign up who says, well, I'm only doing it because I want to particularly work with this person. So I did a short a couple of years ago, or probably more than that now, but with Anita Dobson. And she wanted to do it because we had another actor called Paul Copley in it, and he wanted to do it because Anita was in it. So actors attract other actors. Particularly if they've perhaps never worked together and always wanted to work together, so it gives them an opportunity to do it. But yeah, cast can be hugely important.
So Jackie, obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic. I find, as much as a lot of other young filmmakers in this moment, is the only way to kind of survive as an independent is to kind of pick up other elements and such. And so I found myself personally doing a bit more producing, trying to get things off the ground on a much smaller scale than a feature film, but still kind of growing in that way. What would your advice be for young filmmakers who are finding themselves in this producer role, who don't fully understand or can grasp it yet? Speaking from what I need, but also what I know lots of other filmmakers need, of producing being so important, yet also being such a hard thing to get right, and it all goes, and really obvious when it doesn't go right as well.
And I think there's, and it depends what you're producing, because I think because I work across both shorts and features, and they are actually quite different. Features is quite a big step up from shorts, and shorts you tend to be, I always think of myself as the general dog's body really on a short. But because we do a lot of work with emerging talent, so you're working with them, building their shorts in order to step up to features. And you end up being everything. You're the producer, you're the production manager, you're the line producer, you're the location manager, you're probably the tea person, and just doing a bit of everything. Whereas once you start talking about features and you're financing, and it is quite different, because I was on set every day on Escape, but of course there's a massive crew who are just all getting on, and partly as a producer you're just a little bit in the way on the set, but because we're creative producers, we always want to be present to make sure that we're all still working towards the same vision of the film that we had in the beginning. And for another very good reason, which if you remind me I'll come back to, but a story I heard from David Putnam, so I'll come back to that. But I think for the producing thing is, if you're going to do it, don't be ashamed, A, to say I don't know, and B, to ask for more senior people to come alongside you. And actually for Escape, we approached a really hugely experienced British producer called David Barron, who is just the loveliest man in the world, and has been producing massive movies for about 30 years. And we asked him if he'd come on board as an exec producer, because we felt it would give financiers a bit more confidence that we had somebody of his stature. And actually he read the script and he said, oh, I've never done an Escape movie before, and actually I'd like to come alongside you as a producer, which he did. And it was great to have David, and he'd got so much wisdom from so many years, and if we were ever stuck about something, to be able to phone somebody up like that and just say, what would you do in this situation? And I think it doesn't matter how long you've been doing something, you can always learn from somebody else who's had more experience or just done different things. And I remember saying to David once, I'm learning so much from you. And he said, well, I've never worked in the kind of low budget arena that you work in, and so actually I'm learning stuff from you as well, which was hugely gracious of him, because I'm not sure if he ever did learn anything from me, but just, you know, having ask questions. And I think there are far too many producers who think that they have to know everything, and you just can't. And if you don't know, then you need to ask, and don't be embarrassed about asking.
Brilliant. Fantastic.
And just to go back, so the David Putnam story he was talking about when they were filming The Mission, and he had said to the director, you do not let Robert De Niro actually physically climb that cliff. And then he flew back to London, David Putnam, and was not on set. And of course, Robert De Niro went up and down the cliff. And I thought, and the moment I heard that, I thought, I am never not going to be on set, so that nobody can ever do things that I would not allow to be done.
With my past mountaineering hat on, I know the couple of guys who were the safety mountaineers on that. He was in very good hands.
I'm sure he was, but even stunts and things there that, you know, they are the worst moment of a producer's day. And just being sure that, you're not taking too many risks.
So finally, Jackie, we can't not talk about the pandemic. Obviously, Escape was supposed to come out into the cinemas earlier this year. We've had this huge, unprecedented and, you know, really quite terrifying thing happening across the globe to so many people. A couple of things very briefly. One is, tell us a bit about what is going to be happening with the film, you know, because obviously it could be brilliant for people to be able to see it. And then secondly, just what do you think as a producer is going to be the outworking of how, particularly I suppose, how cinema is going to find its way back in some way? We know that obviously there's always going to be digital and the platforms and all that kind of stuff, and lots of people have gone that route, and there's all the controversy around Warner Brothers at the moment about that. But you know, tell us a bit about how we can get to see you know, Escape from Pretoria, and what your thoughts are on that.
Okay, so Escape, we were quite fortunate in some ways in that it had a very brief theatrical release, but it was always in the UK destined to be on streaming platforms as well. Right. And then internationally, it's just opened in different countries in different ways. Some have opened theatrically. So South Korea, we were number one at the box office for several weeks, and people were going to cinemas. In other countries, it's opened and streaming depending on whether their cinemas are open or shut. I know in South America, I think in Mexico, the US ambassador tweeted that for his first post-lockdown cinema outing, he went to see Escape from Pretoria. And the great thing was, actually, he tweeted about, it's made me want to go and read up more on the story. And you think, hurrah, that's what you want. So it's opened in different ways. In the UK, funnily enough, the UK is the one place at the moment that you pretty much can't see it. But 26th of February 21, you will be able to see it again. I can't tell you how, when, where, or why. I can tell you when, 26th of February 21. But for the rest of it, it's all a bit under wraps at the moment. But it will be available in the UK next February.
Brilliant.
At the moment, that is the plan. So it will have a sort of second lease of life over here. Otherwise, you need to move to Australia, South America, Germany, Russia, Ukraine, Vietnam, South Korea. You know, I mean, our sales agents have done a good job of selling it in pretty much every territory. I think China's one of the few that haven't taken it, but China, of course, has its own rules about taking international films.
It's only 11 a year or something, isn't it? In terms
and they have a quota system, so it's all it's hard to get films out there. In terms of what's going to happen, who knows? Until Warner Brothers did that the other day, I was thinking, cinemas will reopen and people will go back. I think the other side of a vaccine, as people get more confident, so it might not be until end of the summer, moving towards the end of next year. But if cinemas survive, I think there will be movies made to be seen on the big screen. I think the smaller scale movies, that's going to be the problem of films like ours. You know, where will people go and see them in cinemas, or have people got so used to just watching movies on streaming? And I gather the sale of 70-inch televisions has gone through the roof.
Yeah.
So people are just staying at home. Now, partly, I mean, much as I really enjoy the theatrical experience, there's nothing like sitting in a big room with lots of other people enjoying a movie. Part of me also thinks, wow, what was it? I was reading something the other day on Netflix that's had 52 million views. Well, you can only dream of that sort of numbers at the box office. So if people are watching the movies that I make, that's the crucial thing. So yeah, I suspect that smaller independent movies are going to struggle, and also the streaming services, because there's so many of them, the diversification, the number of platforms you've got to look across, it'll be quite hard to get your movie seen and heard. But hey, if Tom Hanks's latest movie is going straight to streaming, then if mine does, well, so be it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Jackie, thank you so much for joining us today. That's been, I mean, there's just so much richness in all of that you've kind of, shared with us. So yeah, Luke, do you want to just do a bit of an outro?
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Jackie. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. Thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you all next week. Bye.